I think one of the biggest mistakes that students make when it comes to core competencies is trying to frame their whole application around them. Ask the Dean, episode 27, streaming out to the world on YouTube, on Facebook, on Instagram. I don't know where else in the world. We need to expand that repertoire. With my lovely mapped family, Dr. Scott Wright, how are you?
Doing well. It's cold here in Austin, Texas, but I'm doing okay.
Texas and cold do not go together, so I don't want to hear it.
Correct.
But I'm glad you're doing
whatever.
okay. And my mapped co-founder, Rachel Grubbs, how are you doing today?
I'm wonderful. It's snowing in Ohio, but I still have my window cracked because I'm a polar bear.
Snowing in Ohio. See? Now do you want to retract your "it's cold in Austin, Texas" comment?
I will not.
That is okay.
I will not.
So for all of you joining us live out who typically aren't with us every Monday, Ask the Dean is a Q&A series that the Mapped team does for our Mapped members. But kind of in honor of Cyber Monday, we wanted to go live to the world to show you the kind of fun that we have here every Monday at 6 p.m. Eastern, and to let everyone know that Mapped for Cyber Monday is a free 30-day trial now instead of a 14-day trial. And if for whatever reason you were crazy enough to want to work with Dr. Scott Wright one-on-one, you can do so at 20% off right now. So Dr. Wright, for people who don't know who you are, talk about your accomplishments in this medical education world.
So great. I will definitely do that. I am 25 years into my experience in medical education. I was the director of admissions at UT Southwestern Med School in Dallas for 10 years. Then moved on to be associate dean and director of all the health professions programming at University of Texas at Dallas, and for a number of years, and then came to Austin, Texas, and was the executive director for the Texas Medical Dental Application Service for up until last year. And then I signed on to join Ryan and Rachel, and it's been a great experience so far, but I would look forward to working with any students that are interested in one-on-one advising to help them understand the process better and to prepare better for their for entry into the application process. So, look at our website, map.com/services, and see what you think. And if you're interested, let us know, and we would enjoy that. So nice. That's awesome.
All right. Thank you for that. I want to jump in as fast as possible to questions. So if you're watching this and you have questions, ask. We see all the comments coming in from YouTube and Facebook. If you are watching on Instagram, then we ask that you go over to Facebook and YouTube. So let's rock and roll.
Rock and roll.
Rock and roll. Got that first question there. I'm going to throw it up. Let's see. Why is my... It seems like students are worried about not having enough clinical experience for their app this cycle. Do you think schools will be lenient on a lack of clinical experience because of COVID? All right. The question that we get every week... that is very important on everyone's minds. And I just realized we're not live on Instagram yet, so I'm just futzing with my... I don't know why my camera's not working, but anyway, keep going.
Well, I'll jump in here and while you're doing that, Ryan. So I think that, we have talked about this quite a bit, and I think that schools will be more lenient on a perhaps on a small level in terms of clinical experience due to COVID. I will also say, however, that part of the other question that was related by the same student says, while I'm while I'm trying to be empathetic to the situation, it seems like many schools, I think med schools, might feel that you shouldn't wait until a year before your application to get clinical experience. And I completely agree with that. I think the leniency that medical schools are going to have is going to be limited. It's not going to just be, okay, the fact that you don't have any clinical experience is fine because of COVID. I think that they're going to look at everything within the context of COVID, but I also think that they're going to have that similar kind of attitude that if you've waited, if you don't have anything and you waited until the last year of your application to get any experience whatsoever, then that may still be a problem. Now, if you're limited in clinical experience, then I think that's another issue that I think medical schools are going to be willing to be lenient on. And so I think it's a yes, there will be more lenient, but it's not a full on so what if you don't have any experience? So I think getting as much as you can will be beneficial. And I know that's difficult in this time, but
yeah,
so
at the end of the day, it always comes down to right the macro versus micro. In the micro, obviously medical schools realize that right now is a hard time to get this experience. In the macro, the question is, what does your full body of evidence show? Is your full body of evidence completely lacking and you were waiting to the last minute to get something, aka you were checking off the box?
Checking off a box. Yep.
Yeah. Or did you have some experience that has been interrupted because of COVID, which is going to be a completely different story?
Yeah.
Rachel's examining. Hello, where's the best place on the AAMC application to explain a dip in GPA that only occurred sophomore year and there's been an upward trend since then? So, Scott, I think the first question here is, do you even need to explain that dip?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I would say it depends on what the student means by dip. I mean, if you were a 4.0 student and you went down to 3.5, then no, you don't have to explain that. Even if you're a 3.5 student and went down to 3.2, I wouldn't say that would be an explanation would be necessary. Now, if you were a 3.5 student and went down to 2.0, then yeah, you probably want to explain that. And but there, AMCAS wise, I don't know if there's really a good place to do that. You could do it in your personal statement, although I wouldn't really feel like that would be the right place to do it. So I don't really know that, Texas and ACOMAS, I think there's some places where you can do that, but AMCAS, I'm not sure. What are your thoughts, Ryan?
Yeah, in my personal statement book, I mention mentioning potentially any big red flags in your personal statement as like a sentence or two at the most. Just
right.
Like, I know that you're going to see this, and I know that it doesn't look great, and here's just a tiniest little bit of explanation. And then when you invite me in for an interview, we can talk about it. But it's just a way to potentially explain it. Outside of that, there isn't a good place for it, unfortunately, and maybe there should be. It's not part of a disadvantaged essay. It's nowhere really else. The one potential place is in secondary essays, which are the outside of the AMCAS application. But a lot of secondary essays will ask about any sort of poor grades or any issues or anything else is a very common question. Anything else that you want to talk about? So that is the recommendation. All right, let's rock and roll for some more here. I know you have discussed this before, but can you discuss core competencies med schools are looking for in applicants? Hey, we just did like a whole series on core competencies, didn't we, Scott?
Absolutely, we did. AAMC has published a number of 9 personal. So they're core competencies, and they're separated into interpersonal, personal competencies. They're scientific competencies. So there's 3 sections of them, and we just finished a workshop series on the personal competencies. Just a couple of weeks ago, we finished it up, and but I would encourage students to go to the AAMC website and look up those pre-professional core competencies that they're looking for in medical students, incoming medical students, and check them out. I think they're very, very important. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's super easy. Just Google AAMC core competencies. I think one of the biggest mistakes that students make when it comes to core competencies is trying to frame their whole application around them. And so then you're not talking about really your story anymore. You're focused on the core competencies. And so that's just a warning to put out there. Go look at them, know what the core competencies are, but don't focus on them and craft your whole application around them.
Agreed.
All right. Hey, thanks for going live today. I have a question about general advice about whether to pursue a do-it-yourself postbac versus a master's/formal postbac for someone who is going for an MD PhD program.
Wow.
So, yeah, question. So at the end of the day, right, obviously from an MD standpoint, we talk about postbac programs all the time and kind of good, better, best scenario when it comes to a postbac program. How much do you think an MD PhD potentially affects a decision algorithm for that choice?
Well, I think it does affect it quite a bit. I'm a little. It depends a little bit on what the student's background is. If they're doing a postbac program because they are non-science had a non-science background, then that would be one thing. If they're doing a postbac program because they didn't do well in their bachelor's degree program and they're having to do GPA repair, then I sort of question the ability for that kind of person to get into an MD PhD program, period. So, there's not any definites or whatever, and I'm just speaking just from my own experience with MD PhD programs. They're super competitive, and some are the NIH funded ones are sort of competitive, and even those that are not NIH funded are very competitive. They're all small programs. So to the question though, I would say, I would really have to know a little bit more about what the situation was with a student to get a sense of what, why the reason for the postbac program. But I would say probably for a formal postbac program, maybe the special master's program would be more appropriate than trying to do it yourself.
Interesting. So you think there's potentially a difference for MD versus MD PhD in terms of that grade repair type student, just because of how competitive MD PhD programs are?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Totally agree with that.
Interesting. Would you consider working in a care facility for people with learning disabilities to be clinical experience?
Learning disabilities. I would say it depends a little bit on what you're doing in the care facility. But generally speaking, I think with learning disabilities, I would say probably no would be my initial reaction to that. My own son has learning disabilities, and he has never been in any kind of facility, but I would say learning disabilities. I sort of think no, probably, but I guess it would depend a little bit on what you're doing.
Yeah, my probably tendency is to lean towards no, without digging a little bit further to find out exactly what they're doing. But that's definitely interesting. Remember, clinical experience, ideally, doesn't specifically have to be in a clinical setting like a hospital, but you're interacting directly with patients. And so long-term care facilities like nursing homes, there's a lot of potential for that to be clinical experience. A lot of students, whenever I talk about clinical experience, students will come to me, well, what about this? And what about this? And what about this? And what about this? All of the million different variations of these jobs students will start to throw at me. And really, I need you to do, you the listener, you watching, you need to do the critical thinking and figure out, based on your activities, what you are doing. Are you interacting with patients outside of an admin role? Are you interacting with patients and helping them in any way? If so, then it likely is clinical experience.
Yeah, agreed.
How do you discuss a non-clinical job that may be frowned upon by admissions committees? Ooh. Let's throw one out there, right? So I'm in Colorado, right? We were one of the earlier states for marijuana. Let's say I have a job at a dispensary. Like, should I even put that on my application?
Wow, I've never thought about this question before. I don't know. I think that you could probably put it on there in a way that doesn't totally reveal what it was. I mean, you could put that you were working retail and that you were a clerk at a retail establishment.
Yes, I made my customers very, very happy.
Right. Exactly. So I don't really know. That's a very good question. I would assume that there are, I guess, a few jobs out there that maybe admissions committees would, as this student puts it, frown on. But I mean, to me, if you start going down that road of, well, is the committee going to frown on this or that or whatever, then you start losing yourself as if you start questioning everything about what, because you don't know what the admissions committee is looking for. You don't know what their backgrounds are, et cetera. So, I get the question, but boy, I don't like going down that road because I think it potentially causes you to get really too careful.
We've had a similar question in the past with a female who was an exotic dancer and potentially talking about that in her application. Would you, I guess at the end of the day, and from your experience as the director of admissions, was there anything inappropriate that really came across your desk?
No. Okay. Not in terms of a job or stuff like that. No, I never saw anything like that. So.
Rachel, you're muted. Sorry.
Hi. I wanted to chime in with one other thing because sometimes context is hard to read in a question. I want to make sure the question asker understands that just because it's not clinical, it's not inherently frowned upon, right? Because you guys jump to sort of the worst case of that question, which is it something that's taboo according to some societal norms, or is it something that was recently illegal? And, personally, I think, anyway, like you said, it's a whole kettle of worms. Yeah. I'm not going to open that one, but I just want to make sure that the person isn't just assuming that because it's non-clinical. Like, you worked at a grocery store.
Yeah.
I mean, I think a doctor who's worked at a grocery store bagging groceries with Karens is probably going to be way more patient than someone who didn't.
That
Oh,
was
yeah.
my first job, was bagging groceries.
Yeah.
Mine too. That's hilarious.
So, and again, there's so many questions coming in, and this particular one came in anonymous anyway. So we're not gonna be able to catch your context, unfortunately, question asker, but
right.
Just in case that was where you were going, I wanted to address that part, that like, it's good to be a well-rounded person with something outside of medicine in your life.
Yeah, good catch. If you're watching on Instagram, we're pulling questions from our YouTube and Facebook streams. So go over to premed.tv or map.tv is our YouTube channels where you can ask questions. So with that said, next question up is, how do you convey to a school in an interview that you really want to go there without sounding desperate? I love this question because I'm like, well, you applied, so that hopefully that means you really want to go there. I don't know what else students can do to like really, really convey that they want to go to that school.
Yeah, I agree. I think that a lot of, I think that, most students come into an interview with the concept that they, really want to go to that school. And whether that's their top choice or not, they convey the message that they really want to go to that school. And so I wouldn't worry about that. And yeah, I do think I would caution not to sound desperate or whatever, but I think you just got to be yourself and say, hey, I'm really interested in this school, and ask good questions of your interviewer. Why do you stay working here? If it's a faculty member, why do you like it? If it's a student, why did you come here? What do you like about it? What do you not like about it? That's about all you can do, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the application itself shows your interest. Obviously, post-interview, potentially, if you have some other acceptances and you're still waiting on your dream school, maybe sending a letter of intent, may just like, hey, like I have other acceptances, but I really want to go here. Post-interview, then maybe there's some options. But outside of that, it's just normal kind of interview etiquette and showing your interest and doing your research on the school and being as specific as possible as to why you're interested in that school.
Agreed. Yeah.
What's the most common mistake people make during an interview? Any tips are appreciated. Ooh, I'm sure you have a stash of interview day goofs.
Well, I think students generally do a pretty good job interviewing. We've, over the years, I really experienced very few interviews that went just totally crazy bad. I think that most students are pretty prepared. They know what they're, want to talk about. I think, maybe one common mistake would be not reviewing their own application prior to going into the interview. It's just so that it's fresh on their mind what they wrote in their application. And then the other thing would be not reviewing the school's website and information about the school where they're interviewing, and not really being up to date on what's going on with that school. I would do both of those.
Yeah. Just super basic things that are a lot of times very easy to forget because students are so focused on so many other things.
Yeah, no, agreed.
I'll just want to just add on one thing. I think just in my mind, the biggest mistake that I see in interviews that I try to fix with people is students trying to go in or go in thinking that they have to prove something to the interviewer, to prove that they're an amazing student. The school obviously likes you, or else they wouldn't have invited you for an interview. And so your job is just to go have a conversation, show them who you are, not try to beat your chest and show them how amazing you are. I think that's where, in my mind, that's where students fail a bunch.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
All right. Can online journal research make up for a lack of traditional clinic or bench research? Due to COVID, I've not been able to get actual research. Online journal research. I guess it depends on what online journal research is. Like, are you tasked with a project and you need to go review different research articles and pull in some information to develop a new hypothesis for a new research study, or like, are you just reading reading journals?
Right. Yeah, and I do think this question highlights one of the myths about medical school admissions, which is that you have to have research experience to get in. And I don't agree with that. I think that many applicants don't have research experience, or they have very, very limited research experience. And medical schools, most medical schools don't require it. Even research-intensive medical schools don't, have as a standard that you have to have X amount of research experience hours or whatever in order to be considered. So, I think if you don't have any research experience and you're doing some sort of online journal thing, whatever that is, sure, I think that's fine. But now, if you say all over your application, "Oh, I want to do research," and you don't have any research, then that's an issue, obviously. But but just generally, I don't think that a research experience is a definite must that you got to have, like clinical experience is. So.
Yeah, it's interesting. I talk about that all the time. I actually recently did a TikTok video where I said research was probably one of the most overrated parts of an application, and from a pre-med perspective.
Yeah.
And they always come back to me with this stat, and I always know it's going to come back, that the AAMC publishes this information on students and matriculants, and it shows that it's like 90% of matriculants have research, and 84% or even less than that have clinical experience or shadowing experience. And so they go, see, research is more important because more students have it. I'm like, that's all self-reported data, and we don't really know, right, what students are putting on their application and where are they pulling this information from. So I always kind of deflect away from those numbers, because I don't know where that information is pulling from.
Agreed. Yeah, I agree with that. I wonder, because I think that is student reported stuff, and sometimes students report. Well, I took a lab class in my senior year of college, and that's not research, So, but they say it is, and so yeah.
Yep. Yeah, that's a good point.
A lot of good questions tonight.
Do activities that were done before college but not in high school count? I did not attend college right after high school and worked in a nursing home for 2 years. I think it's a good question.
Good question. Yeah. Very good question. Well, I know that, what I would say to this is that what they really want to see is everything post high school graduation. So in this particular scenario, absolutely that would count, and you would want that on your application is post high school graduation. And so yes, I definitely think that's something that you would want to include.
Yep. Yeah. General rule of thumb is everything after high school, not everything after the start of college.
Right. Correct.
Yep.
That's
small
correct.
Little.
And kudos to you for doing the non-traditional route, and doing something after high school to kind of, I don't know why you did it that way, but I wish more students would get their heads screwed on properly before they try to spend all the money for college and stuff, all their parents' money and stuff like that. So yeah.
A very backwards system. How does one convey their story and what you learned from activity if TMDS only gives you a limited number of characters to explain them? So, Scott, I have a bone to pick with you, since you're the former executive director of TMDSAS. You, and I'm going to blame you specifically, you only allow 300 characters on an activity.
Yeah.
versus 700
Yeah.
for AMCAS, 600 for ACOMAS. Why do y'all, since you're in Texas, why do y'all restrict the ability for students to tell their story a little bit better?
Well, that's a good question, and I think this goes back years and years, even years before I was at TMDSAS. And but my feeling is that it's largely because you don't want students to go on and on and on and on and on about what they did in their shadowing experience with a doctor or whatever. You want them to be concise, succinct. You want it to be, only to the point of that activity, and not broadened, beyond that, and go all around the world with it. Not that that's what students would do with 700 characters, but I think now you also got to keep in mind that AMCAS gives you 700 characters, but they also only give you 15 slots.
Yep. So
for those 700 characters.
Yep.
So it's very different. At TMDSAS, you could have 30 activities or whatever. So, I think when it comes to the description of activities, you do have to be very concise. Even with 700 characters, you still have to be somewhat concise on that. But with TMDSAS, certainly you can't. And what I would say is that in those descriptions, activity descriptions, you do not need to have full sentences. So in other words, you don't have to say, I was shadowing a physician and he or she did this and that, and I saw this and that, period, and then start over another sentence. You can just say, you can use abbreviations, use punctuation well to separate your thoughts, but you don't have to spend all those characters with full-on sentences. You can break it up into fragments and stuff like that. All you're wanting to do is get across what did you do and what was the meaning of it to you, and that's what's important.
Yeah, I agree. All right, what's we got? I stopped shadowing a physician a few months before COVID started. I have 1.5 years of shadowing. I've continued to get clinical experience. Will this hurt my application? I want to apply this coming cycle. No.
Well, this sort of goes back to the question we had earlier related to clinical experience. It sounds like you've got quite a bit already, a 1.5 years of clinical experience, and you're continuing to do some stuff. So, well, she said, I think if we go back to that question, I think she said 1.5 years of shadowing.
Yeah.
Shadowing. I've continued to get clinical experience. Right. So this applicant, I don't think there's an issue. I think you're definitely good to apply this cycle, considering the clinical and shadowing experiences for sure.
Yep.
I think you're ahead of the game in terms of a lot of students.
Yeah, that's the whole macro argument that I always talk about. So in the macro, this person has done what they wanted to do, and yes, there's going to be a gap because of COVID and everything else, but they've done well with everything else, so it's good.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, rocking and rolling, keep them coming. How do adcoms weigh part-time jobs held during undergrad against a lower than average GPA? Ooh, good nuance here. So really, Scott, again, from your role as the former director of admissions, when it comes to, and a lot of schools do rubrics. Did you have rubrics at UT Southwestern when it came to looking at applications and scoring applications?
No.
Okay.
No.
So no rubric there, but potentially, just thinking out loud here, there's that potential of what's the GPA, and are there any sort of extenuating circumstances that may lead to someone having a lower GPA? How much is that taken into account?
Yeah, it is taken into account. And a good example of that is varsity sports. Playing varsity sports is a huge time commitment, And I think students who play varsity sports often have a little bit lower GPA because of that. Not always, but sometimes they do. Another good example of that is the military academies, where there's tons of commitments and stuff, and they have a lot of, extra stuff they have to do, and their GPAs may be, different because of that. Now, part-time job, I'm a little worried about that because, yeah, if a student works full-time, then obviously, yeah, there may well be an issue in terms of GPA that has to be considered by an admissions committee. Part-time, I worked part-time all the way through college. I think a lot of students work part-time. A little bit of it depends on what the student means by part-time. Are we talking 15 hours a week? Are we talking about 30 hours a week? What are we talking about in terms of the number of hours that the student is working? But I think that the schools will give a little bit of wiggle room for GPAs that are affected by these outside activities and stuff. But my experience is it's just a little bit of wiggle room. Yeah. You can't come in and say, well, I worked all the time and I had a 2.2 GPA. Well, that's just not going to work. We're not, that's not going to happen. So,
no. At the end of the day, you still have to prove academic capabilities to get through medical school, and having a part-time job
absolutely
doesn't excuse that.
Correct. That's absolutely correct.
Ooh, I love these ones. Lots of conflicting information whether an applicant is URM, disadvantaged, or first gen. Is there a rule of thumb or general advice on how to navigate these terms? Let me step back and go, do these terms even matter?
Well, I do think they matter. I think that it depends on the school. It depends on the state that the school is in, as to how much or if any it may matter. Mm-hmm. Disadvantaged is a very vague term that I think even the AAMC, it's a self-reported thing. Disadvantage. You click the box and that's it. And I know that TMDSAS attempts to get at that disadvantaged question a little bit more, and they do ask if you're first generation college student or college graduate, and you're URM. They're going to calculate that on their own, but students are still self-reporting their ethnic or racial background.
Yep.
So I think the rule of thumb is just be as honest and with the medical schools as possible. With what you consider, because everything you put in your application is going to be open for discussion at an interview. And so if you say a disadvantaged and then the interviewer says to you, tell me more about why you consider yourself disadvantaged, and you fumble around with something because, your father, I don't know, some weird thing and that doesn't make any sense, and that's going to be a real problem. Yeah. Also with URM stuff, if the old adage was, and this goes years and years back, but it was, can an Egyptian indicate that they're a African American?
Yeah.
And or whether and so there are discussions about this and stuff like that, but I think you just have to be honest with yourself and honest with the medical schools as much as you can, because they're going to sniff out if they feel like you're trying to somehow be weird or something. So
I heard a story recently from someone who knew someone, so take it with a grain of salt, but around that specific example that you gave, someone who was South African, was Afrikaans, who was white, but because they're from South Africa, put that they were African American on their application, thinking it would give them a leg up. And so I'm like, I don't think this works that way. But really,
no, that's not going to work.
Yeah, to get back to the heart of that question, right? Those are three distinct kind of categories of whatever, right? So URM, underrepresented minority, or underrepresented in medicine, two different ways of saying those two things. That comes down to what you're checking off as race and ethnicity. So
Right.
that's one thing. So there's really no like you're URM or you're not. Again, some schools may decide if you're URM or not, and so it's very school specific. Maybe depending on the communities that they take care of. And then when it comes to disadvantage, Scott, as you said, at least on AMCAS's application, it's a self-reported thing. You check the box. They give you some
Right.
vague guidelines on what potentially could be considered disadvantaged, but anyone can check that box, and then you have 1,325 characters to explain why you think you're disadvantaged.
Yeah.
And so disadvantage has nothing to do with race. It has nothing to do with ethnicity. It has nothing to do with how much income you have. It's whether or not you think your upbringing, what you were given, the tools you were given, the resources you were given, potentially were less than maybe what is considered standard. And then from a first generation student, obviously, if you're the first one going to college in your family or first one potentially graduating in your family, that's calculated. AMCAS does some automatic calculations for first generation based on what I think it's based on your parents' occupations, not your parents' occupations, your parents' highest education level. There's a socioeconomic disadvantaged score that you get based on that. That's automatically generated, but you don't select that. So fun terms that students navigate around.
Yeah. Agreed.
How much does fit matter in picking medical schools? If GPA is slightly below the school's average, but all my experiences are in the same realm the schools focus on, should I still apply? I love talking about school fit and stats when picking schools. So I'll go first here. I 1000% don't agree with the norm of picking schools based on stats. All that does is perpetuate the same stats over and over and over and over again. Students need to look at schools based on a lot of factors: location, mission, vision, curriculum, so many different things to determine whether or not you are going to be a good student at that school. The schools have a range of GPAs of students who they accept. And obviously all those numbers are kind of crunched down into the median that we see on the MSAR. And then we have the 25th, 75th, 10th, and 90th percentiles as well. But obviously 10th percentile, there's still a lot of students being accepted below that number, right? 10% of the class is below that number. So I 1000% think if you think you're a good fit for the school, if you think that school will be good for you, apply, even if your stats are below.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. I think that, we've discussed it before, that the only real absolute in the application process for medical school is if you don't apply, you're not going to get in. So, you really got to put your hat in the ring and say, here's why I think I'd be a good fit for this institution. And then, let them see what they think about you. So I agree with you completely, Ryan.
Yep. Yeah, I get a lot of messages from students who, like, I got into my dream school. My MCAT is 7 points below their median, but and I wasn't going to apply to them, but I listened to your kind of theory and methodology behind picking schools, and I did, and I got in. So
yeah.
All right. How long should the quote why medicine answer be? Is it okay to discuss a few main points with short anecdotes, or keep it more general so that the interviewer can ask more? Ooh, general, how long should my answer be?
So this is, I guess, the personal statement, why medicine.
I think this
part
is,
of the personal
this is
statement
interview.
is
This is
medicine.
an interview question.
Okay. Is it okay to discuss a few main points with a short anecdote or keep it more general? So, I see. So, yeah, I think it has to be as long as it needs to be. What you don't want to do is go around the world and take 15 minutes of a 25-minute interview to explain why medicine. That makes it sound like you're trying to convince yourself more than you're trying to convince the interviewer of this, stuff. So, I think, I think that, if it takes, 2 or 3 minutes, I think that would be appropriate. If it takes 10 minutes, that's probably too long.
Yeah.
That would be
2 to
my
3 minutes is
short
actually
answer to
really
that.
long when it comes to an interview answer as well. So I think a lot of students overestimate or underestimate how much they can say in a short amount of time. So very similar to a personal statement, right? When you write your personal statement, you obviously are very restricted in terms of character count. You can tell the same story as your personal statement in more of a flowery way because you're talking now, and be very succinct. So don't try to give your whole resume and everything when it comes to answering in an interview.
Yeah, because the likelihood is that the interviewer has read your personal statement, and so, or they had access to read it. And so, yeah, I think that you got to depend on the fact that they've read that, so they sort of know, and so then they're just wanting you to sort of go back over that and kind of bring in some other things about why medicine. And so I did have a student that I was working with recently who took really way too long getting to the point of the why medicine question. And so we had to really work on his ability to kind of pare it down and not go all around the world talking about various stuff to get to the point of this is why. So.
All right.
Got another one.
Am I disadvantaged if I apply to medical school at 43 years old? Boomer. I love the
I love that.
Boomer.
Boomer, I'm going to assume that your name is Boomer because I too am 43 and we are on the Gen X millennial
You're
line.
not a boomer.
Yeah, Gen X, not Boomer.
That's funny.
Well, coming from a boomer, I feel a little bit, I'm the only boomer in this triad, and so
You're
I feel
an elder Gen X.
Little, that's too funny. No, I would say go ahead and apply. You're not going to be disadvantaged, and if you are, do you really want to go to that school?
Yeah. The schools that are going to have any sort of bias towards you are not going to interview you. But there are plenty of schools out there who will love the fact that you're a 43-year-old applicant and will cherish the experiences and intangibles that you bring. So go for it.
And I would also hasten to add that if you could prove that you were disadvantaged by being 43 years old, you'd have a pretty damn good lawsuit.
Good lawsuit. Yes, you would.
All right. So we talked about COVID a little bit already tonight, but we keep getting COVID questions. So I'm going to pick one that I think sort of sums up a lot of what the questions are getting at.
For students who were hoping to get shadowing and clinical experience prior to the 2021 application cycle, but were not able to get any due to COVID, what can they do?
Well, e-shadowing, e-shadowing.com.
E-shadowing.com.
Definitely encourage students to get involved in that and keep looking for other things that are available in your community. I know it's tough, but you got to keep trying it and keep looking for stuff. And if you're not able to find anything, then I would say go ahead and apply and see what happens. And just explain a lot of schools in their secondary applications are asking questions about how has COVID affected you and your experiences and stuff. And that's where you have to write about how you weren't able to, get any experiences during the COVID pandemic because of it, and then just see what happens. That's about all you can do, I think.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a caveat, a subsection of students who are in this situation who haven't been able to get clinical experience, who haven't been able to get shadowing, who I would very likely tell them to not apply because they won't be able to verbalize and write out in their personal statement and verbalize in an interview why they want to be a physician, right? They're going to be the students who are like, well, I have a 4.0 GPA and a 520 MCAT, so that's obviously going to have to be good enough for now. And there will be some schools that are like, okay, yep, I get it, right? COVID, you couldn't get any experiences. But at the heart of the medical school application is, why are you doing this? Right? Why are you going into a field where science is being challenged every day out in the public right now, right? We have a huge crisis on our hands where experts aren't being believed. We have hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt going to medical school. We have huge burnout issues in physicians. Why do you want to do this? Are you do you have enough experience in the healthcare world to really show me that you want to do this outside of you really loved all 16 seasons of Grey's Anatomy? So I think there's going to be have to be students who are going to have to delay because they just don't know why they're doing this other than they've always wanted to do it.
Yeah.
And this is something that I almost always chime in when Dr. Gray and Dr. Wright talk about clinical. We never mean that as an affront to the question asker. We're not saying, why do you want to be a doctor? Clinical, we were talking before about research might be one of the most overrated aspects of applying. Clinical is usually the most underrated. A lot of people have in mind that they should get their MCAT out of the way and their prereqs out of the way, and then maybe they'll do clinical, which is why so many people are caught this year because of COVID, because they had saved it for their last year. So if you're in that position, you're going to have to make a choice on whether or not you're rolling the dice in May. For anyone who's more years out from med school, now you know. Right? Do whatever you can to start getting shadowing and clinical. And a few people in the question said, should I even try to shadow? Absolutely, you should. Ask. The worst that'll happen is they'll say no, and maybe they'll say yes, or maybe they'll say no, but I'll keep you in mind when it is a yes.
Yeah. I've been surprised how many students are saying they've been getting clinical experience. The public health side of me wants to go no, don't go spread your germs to patients. But if the clinics and hospitals are allowing it, then take advantage. Be safe.
Yeah, well, it seems like right now shadowing is actually harder to get than clinical, especially if you're willing to get clinical paid work as opposed to volunteer work. I'm definitely hearing about people being turned away for volunteer opportunities, but I mean, we need workers right now.
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, and our Boomer friend says they're an RN, so thank you for your service, Boomer. Well, we're almost
at our time.
Yeah, we're at time here. This has been so fun. It's on the screen, but for those that are maybe multitasking, I just want to remind everyone that right now you can try Mapped for 30 days. So normally we have a free trial that's 14 days long, but if you join Mapped today, and actually anytime this week, but today's good, then we'll give you a 30-day trial. And it's really a free trial, no credit card required. So just go give us your contact info and hop in and start checking out Mapped. And then the other thing we've got going on, I'll throw up the other banner just so people can read it, is 20% off of one-on-one advising with this fellow right here.
Hi, everybody.
He's waving.
Hey, everybody.
And that is technically through Friday, but I want to say it with caution because people are enrolling really quickly and he is one man, and we will limit his student load to make sure that each student who works with him gets the right kind of care. So that sale either ends when Scott's schedule is booked or Friday, whichever comes first. So if you're really interested in working with him, that might be something you want to do sooner than later.
Yep.
Yeah, agreed.
Awesome. Thanks everyone for coming. We got to do these live
Yeah.
out to the whole world every few weeks to
Yeah, they're so
say
fun.
hi to people.
Yeah, I agree.
All
I agree.
right.
That'd be
Good
awesome.
night, everyone.
Everyone have a great night.
Awesome.
Bye.
Bye.